Hi, my love.
Hello.
Hi, everyone listening. It's Sam and Emma tuning in again, and we're so happy to be here for our second podcast on Birth the Middle Way.
We're back.
We're back. And so, yeah, as those who listened in our last call, we really presented, the story of Emma and her birth and the passing of her son Floyd. And yeah, we have created this space as a conversational space for stories to be shared and for ideas to be explored. And so, as you know, Emma and I were very much so in a beautiful container, one on one, and processing things and having these conversations. And one thing we found come up over and over again as we were, undulating between your process and your grief and the nuances of kind of what was influencing different layers of your process, right? And exploring different concepts together. We kept coming back to this thread that birth is unknown, birth is a mystery, birth is unpredictable. There is no guaranteed path that will guarantee life. And what do we do with that? How do we hold that? And, really looking at where we're at collectively right now in the conversation around birth. And what we kept highlighting was this thread of polarity that exists in the birth world today. And this is something, we really feel called to speak into and to explore together within this space and to explore with everyone who comes to join us in conversations in this space.
Mhm.
And, really highlighting the negative impact actually that the polarization is having for women and families, right? And to name that polarity, really we're looking at the differences and the stories and the belief systems oriented in different directions, mainly that being free birth as an extreme, home birth, and hospital birth, right? And of course, there's a lot of nuances, and families move through even those three categories in very different ways. And yet, it can be really normal to hear semantics of, "Oh, you're going to birth at home? That's so risky and dangerous. Oh, aren't you worried that the doctor is just going to funnel you through the cascade of interventions and you're going to get a C-section if you birth in the hospital?" Right? These narratives, these stories that we carry that are oftentimes rooted in fear, right? In either direction. And so I'm sure for every mother or woman who has been pregnant listening to this call, we can all relate to the unsolicited stories, projections, thoughts, beliefs that just kind of get thrown at us. It's like our belly starts to grow, and all of a sudden, Aunt Susie wants to tell you that her friend had that birth when she was young, and you better be careful, young lady. And we get these narratives thrown at us, and it's a really hard thing to hold and to sift through as a pregnant woman. As we know, pregnancy is this very open state. It's an altered state of consciousness, really. And so, there's a paradox there, right? To know that, okay, a woman is open and she's feeling all of these things and she's in this very delicate state of consciousness, while simultaneously all of society feels some weird permission to share all of their unsolicited thoughts with said pregnant woman.
Mhm.
And so, we really just want to present this topic of the polarization and specifically highlight two things that we have kind of seen happen in certain circles that are presenting a conversational space around birth or teachings around birth or a space for women to come to receive guidance around birth. And those two things, those two threads with that kind of express from this space of polarity are the creation of an echo chamber, which is a space or a container in which really only one idea or only one set of ideas is allowed to exist. And anything that challenges that said narrative is kind of attacked or pushed out quite instantly and immediately. Like, nope, can't have that, you know? And the other is the quality of gatekeeping, which is when, more so a leader in a space or leaders in a space are holding that space in that way to kind of create that echo chamber, right? They are the gatekeepers. I will allow you to enter this conversation and I will not allow you to enter. And so actually the gatekeeping is kind of what perpetuates that creation of the echo chamber. And yeah, we feel as though we want to create the opposite. And we really want to be activating a unique space for all stories to be heard, for all experiences to be spoken, for all beliefs to be explored in the space of conversation and communication, and to interface with maybe something that is really confronting, something that you really disagree with, right?
Yeah. And just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't connect. Just because we have different ideas or experiences doesn't mean we can't still come together and find common ground. And I want to also add that we're not here to blame, shame, judge. We're here to discuss. We're here to poke holes and have our blind spots viewed and have other people engage in this dialogue where historically, in my experiences and from what you've shared with me, Sam, that's not been the case. That hasn't been what's happened. When we share an alternate opinion, uh, it's yeah, as you described, pushed away, it's shunned, it's blocked out, or it's been in the cases of some hospital settings, you can be educated in a way to manipulate your perspective into changing, which is not what we're here for either. We're not here to manipulate you. We don't have an agenda to get you to think a certain way or feel a certain way or change your mind.
Right.
We are here to talk
Right.
and listen.
Right. And I actually like it's interesting, because we've shared this privately, like these intentions and these processes, and it's interesting because in this moment when you shared that and you're like, it's not we're not here to judge. I have a judgment actually that I would like to name, and I just want to actually like lead with that vulnerability and with that truth and with that honesty to actually be actively creating the conversational space that we're desiring to create, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I do have a judgment against the perpetuation of creating echo chambers and icing people out when they don't agree with you. And so I'm just going to name it. I'm going to put it in the space. That is a judgment that I carry. I feel as though my judgment to name it specifically is that it's dangerous. I feel like it's deeply unproductive and actually it borderlines danger, right? And so I'm just going to speak it. I'm going to be so transparent and real in this space, and I'm going to name the organization of the Freebirth Society.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't to come in attack, right? And I'm going to preface that by saying, look, the Freebirth Society has done a lot of really beautiful things for women. And I don't care what experience I've had or what other women have had in terms of the negative perpetuation of experience. That's real and true. And what is also real and true and standing next to, right beside that truth, is that so many women have been liberated by their teachings, have been empowered by their teachings to birth in extremely beautiful ways. And the result has been hundreds and thousands of amazing birth experiences.
Right. And to continue on to that thread of this echo chamber and this judgment on echo chambers, I think it's also really powerful in that same breath to sit in circles where people do agree with you, where people do validate you just by saying, wow, me too.
Right.
And so I'm not, I'm actually very much with you in that tender holding of judgment of like, yeah, I don't think that's entirely safe. And I can't fully judge it because sitting in spaces with women who understand, where they can just say, I know, me too, I agree, can be so powerful and isn't always damaging. But
Right.
I think it's the way that those spaces are held. And if there can be awareness and accountability and intention
Right.
when there is an echo chamber or when there is validation being present versus having somebody say, hey, but what about this? And countering or counteracting maybe a core value or a belief of a group, whether it's the Freebirth Society or a medical doctrine, right? Those are two very loud extremes that we are presented with as women of what path are we going to follow when it comes to birthing our babies? What is the safest thing? What is the path of least harm? You know, for our children, for our families, for ourselves.
Right. Exactly. And so the thing I think to actually highlight in that is that I think close to all parents are really making these decisions from their interpretation of safety, right? And I
Right.
think that that's a really important thing to highlight because if we can connect on that thread and honor the fact that what makes me feel safe and what makes you feel safe might be different,
Mm-hmm.
then we can actually honor each other's decision making from that place.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe reframing even the, you know, we're not here to judge. Like I'll stand by that, but I will just share an addendum to that piece of I want to acknowledge, and you've already shown that, acknowledging where our judgments are and looking at them and exploring them, right? So maybe, I don't know, now I'm kind of sitting with like, well, but judgment can be healthy to a certain degree, you know, and discernment and all of these things. And we are human. It's a natural part of our humanity, but let's bring that into a conversation and not create dogma around our judgments and create rhetoric that we're pushing onto other people because of a judgment that we may not know where it comes from.
Exactly, exactly. And I think you made a really beautiful association there between judgment and discernment because discernment is a form of judgment, right? And it serves a very beneficial purpose. And so there isn't any part of our humanness, that isn't a part of the whole and doesn't serve a purpose. And that includes judgment for sure. But I think the important thing with judgment is actually that we're remaining curious about our judgments and that we are orienting towards a place of reflection
Mm-hmm.
through that curiosity. The curiosity can very much so be the vehicle that drives that process of reflection and allowing for those things to shift and alchemize and also be nuanced, right? Like it's like what I say, like it's like, okay, so my experience is that I made a comment that asked a question on the page of the Freebirth Society, and it was like they had turned the comments off of one very controversial, in my personal opinion, video that they had shared, and I just asked the question, like, I'm curious why you turned the comments off on the past video. And so it had to be commented on the thread of the video before, and there was a bunch of already people commenting kind of similar things. And for whatever reason that question or curiosity wasn't allowed, and I got blocked. So that's an extreme for me in terms of an echo chamber. Like what, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
people aren't even allowed to ask questions or call you out on certain behaviors, so to speak, like just illuminating, highlighting, like, hey, what's this behavior about? Like, you're posting this video, but are you actually fully aligned in posting it? Because all your other videos have comments on, and this particular one has comments off, and so
And this is an experience another friend of mine has with the Freebirth Society where there was a video of a woman who decided to birth at I think it was 26, 28 weeks, and she had some questions. And the Freebirth Society, I guess, Instagram moderator, whether it's Emily Saldea herself or someone else, I don't know, responded, and then a subsequent question was asked, and then that friend was blocked. And I've heard this experience so many times. And the more that I hear about it, the more that I am so curious about some organization that is stepping forward to educate women on birth and not engaging with the questions, because what is education without questions,
right.
right? It's just somebody speaking. It's
Well, it's
just
indoctrination, right?
is. And my experience of sharing my story on social media, I was very intentional with I am not deleting comments. I've deleted only one comment because it was a man speaking negatively about my son's name. And I was like, that doesn't belong here. But I've had videos that went viral, millions and millions of views, and people saying things. One extreme is, thank you so much. I've had the same experience. I'm so sorry for your loss. I needed this. It feels good to not be alone. The other extreme, you killed your son, you should be in jail. And I was very intentional with not deleting those comments because it shows the consciousness, whether spoken or unspoken, around viewpoints that people carry surrounding birth. And birth is an activating, inflammatory, emotional conversation that doesn't just involve women, it impacts everybody because we are all born.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so, yeah, from that, I think that it's just our prayer and intention for this space is it's not to educate, like we're not actually here to like tell you this or that. We'll definitely, you know, have conversations with professionals that are going to share information, and we're so open to the blossoming of this prayer that is really just a seed, and we're just here putting that seed in the ground in this moment, and we really have no idea what is going to bloom. It's like we planted a mystery seed. We don't know if it's a flower, if it's a vegetable, if it's a tree, what it's going to be. It's going to be, but it's going to grow, it's going to blossom, and we trust in that process, right? And yeah, so really just from certain experiences like this, it has informed this prayer even more of like the world actually needs this. Like we need a place where doctors are welcome to come and share their voice, where mothers who, and that's the thing, mothers who have lost babies trying to free birth, who have then reached out to the Freebirth Society to share their story and experience and been shut out and blocked. And I know multiple mothers who have had that experience. And that's where, I would create that link between an echo chamber being dangerous,
Yeah.
right? It's like that's really harmful. That's really, really harmful behavior to have
Yeah.
been the entity that encouraged that choice making, right? And of course, yes, self-responsibility. Of course, I honor that. And every woman who's engaged with their content has integrated and digested that within herself and come out with that choice.
And that's also difficult as well, right? Because there's that nuance of you engage with the Free Birth Society content, you look at different people's comments. One person saying, oh, I just free birthed my baby last week. Oh, this happened. Oh, I had a hemorrhage, but I drank peppermint tea and it's all good. Or I did this, or I had this, or I birthed, breech and cord prolapse and, a 5-day long labor and everything was fine. And so you have all of these positive, affirming comments. And then as you engage with their content, you're thinking, this is good. This is the way to go. This is how women have been birthing for millennia since the dawn of time. We've always been birthing alone, which isn't actually fucking true. And I needed to emphasize that with a curse. Like I needed to because because it's not actually accurate. It's not actually true. But when you are engaging with content of that magnitude with that many community members or followers, and you are deleting comments that are speaking contrary things, you get a warped idea of what reality is, and that is dangerous. So, yes, self responsibility. And I think there might be a layer of manipulation or brainwashing, right? And you could speak more to that as somebody with like mental health background, but there is something there too. There's a big piece there.
Right. Exactly. There, exactly. Exactly. And that is such an important piece to highlight. And that's where, like the nuances of these things really come through. And it's like, oh my God, look at the beauty in all of these successful free births and all of these women who have had the most empowering birth experience that they called in because in many ways they interface with that information. And also, we have to be really aware with things like this that of the nuances of what people come to information like this with, right? And so specifically, I want to speak into the women that come to this information with past medical trauma, right? And so they're already carrying a deep-seated trauma and or fear of the system. And then this woman becomes pregnant. And then it's like, oh no, but I have to give birth in a hospital. No, I don't want to give birth in a hospital, you know? And I know personally women who have gone through this. And in some areas of the world, midwifery care is sparse. No, there isn't a huge access to that, specifically in many areas of Canada, which is where both of our roots are from. And so I do know women, in Southeast Saskatchewan, kind of these areas, where it's not really an option, and there's big rules around it. If it's your first baby, nope. If you go past 40 weeks, no. Like there's all of these like boundaries that can also be really, really scary to hold and to navigate as well. And so, and then you hear about the Freebirth Society and you start listening to all of their podcasts, right? And exactly what you said, all of their podcasts are the success stories, and specifically they orient towards highlighting the nuanced ones. Like I'm sure my birth story would have got highlighted because I had a free birth and it was a breech baby and there was no issues, right? And so
And
likely,
I will,
go ahead.
I will interrupt and just say that on their podcast, they do have some stillbirth episodes. That being said, those stillbirth episodes have a consciousness around them where the mother is still pro free birth. And so they're still pushing this concept of like pro free birth. This is all that we're talking about, free birth, even if your baby dies, like still that was a good decision. And in some cases, I can't say if that's a good decision or not, and it is, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, like I've come across a few stories that they've shared, and oftentimes it is the stillbirths that kind of do unfold in that way, right? In kind of the
Mhm.
free birth way where they maybe find out that their baby has passed, they choose to have a sovereign birth at home and honor that in a ceremonial way in their home, and there's
Mhm.
so much beauty to that. And I absolutely encourage that path for the families that feels most aligned for, right? And but, your story where your OBGYN was praying with you, that doesn't really fit their narrative.
No, it doesn't. And when you have people that are already resistant to the medical system, and not just the medical system, but authority. So if you have trauma with any amount of authority, if you have sexual trauma, if you have, trauma with abusive parents, even, that can create a desire to have a more sovereign, empowered birth where you are more in control. There's so many layers there. And when you have a doctrine that is speaking ill of the medical system, you already spoke to this a little bit earlier on, where they're pushing a fear narrative that you're going to go into a hospital and there's going to be a cascade of interventions and protocols, and then you're going to end up with a very traumatic cesarean birth. And you are saying that the medical system equals trauma. That is, I mean, that's just not the whole truth. That is true for some women in some cases.
Right.
That is not always true. I went in to the medical system, and as you said, I had doctors praying with me, like taking off their hat, crying with me, thanking me. Like I had continuously, like that wasn't just one doctor. That was over the course of a year of different hospitals, different doctors, different nurses holding my hand, crying with me, praying for me. Like it's not all or nothing. It's not black or white.
Right.
There is so much nuance. Everything is nuanced. And in a space where there's no room for nuance, that is where the danger occurs. That is where things become problematic. Whatever perspective you're coming from, because if you're coming from a very medicalized perspective, that has its own issues as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit,
Right.
but when it comes to this extreme as well of hospitals are a bad place, which I definitely carried that fear of, like, I don't want to go to a hospital. Hospitals are where your baby dies. Every single woman that I knew that lost a child birthed in a hospital. I was like, not a chance,
Right.
not a chance. I was born at home
Right.
and everything went well. All these other women that birthed at home, things went smoothly. And that is a big piece of what went to inform my decision making, you
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. I'm curious, I don't know if I've asked you this question before. Did you have any experiences with any hospital staff over your experience over your timeline of interfacing with the medical system that felt negative or impacted you in any negative way?
Since Floyd,
Mhm.
no.
No. Yeah.
I I think there was maybe one circumstance where I needed to do some pre-surgical screening prep. So I wasn't going in for surgery. I was just going in for a checkup, and I had to do some pre-surgical screening. And I drove like 6 hours to go to this hospital, and I almost had to drive back. Um, but I didn't read the prep instructions properly.
Oh.
It was a me thing. It was
Uh-huh.
fully me, and but I did have an internal reaction of like, oh my God, the hospital, blah, blah, blah. But it was so guttural and so instinctual of like, they're not going to help me. They're like, and I caught myself immediately, and I asked the man that was helping me some questions, and we pulled up the email that was sent, and I read it out to him, and I was like, oh, I was mistaken. And he laughed and I laughed. And then we figured it out. I didn't have to go home because it wasn't super necessary prep. And anyway, it all worked out really well. But I did notice that internal response right away. And if I hadn't caught it, I could have so easily made up a story in my head.
Right.
So easily, you know? And he was great. And I saw him, whatever, a couple months after that. And he was like, hey, I remember you. How are you doing? And and it was beautiful, and he even remembered, like, did you do the surgery prep this time? I was like, yes, I did. Thank you. You know,
Awesome. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've had no negative experiences like in the hospital system whatsoever.
Right.
Not one. And that is mind blowing. And I've had lots of people that are like, that's because, Floyd's pulling all the strings for you and he's making sure that, you're being held properly. And I do wonder if that's the case. I wonder if does my skin tone play a role? I've wondered is the way that I'm communicating because I'm not communicating from a place of pride or aggression or ego. I'm communicating from a place of informed curiosity. I'll say like I want to have information. This is what I know currently, what I think I know currently.
Right.
Um, but I'm not coming from a place of you're the bad guy. I'm coming from a place of we're on the same team. How can we move forward together in harmony? And that's also something that I've seen in the Freebirth Society, where they do kind of push this ideology or idea that the hospital is going to push you in this way or that way. And I have wondered, are hospital staff in at some circumstances, in some moments, are they just responding to somebody's belief that is taking the forefront of an interaction as opposed to showing up with curiosity? And of course, it's not a black and white answer, right? There's every potential under the sun for why interactions happen the way they do.
Right.
It's not just one or the other, right?
Right. And so that's definitely, that's one really beautiful thread to explore is, and what I hear you speaking to in that is actually just our humanness and our humanity and the reality that every professional in a hospital brings their humanness and their past experiences and their beliefs and their orientations into their work. And every human that is a client that comes in, a patient, also comes in with those same past experiences, belief systems. And then when we come together, there's kind of this interaction or this weaving or, meeting
Mm-hmm.
of those things, and either it flows or it doesn't, and so there are going to be for sure some people in the system that, let's say for example, to bring it into like the birth conversation, have judgments against women and families who do choose to try to birth at home. And
Mm-hmm.
inevitably, the only home birth situations that somebody in the hospital is experiencing are those in which something goes wrong and need to transfer to the hospital. And
Right.
so they're going to be receiving the confirmation bias. And for those that don't know what confirmation bias is, it is when there is an experience in front of us that reinforces a belief that we already have based on past experiences. And that we have an orientation within our psychology to look for confirmation bias. Okay. And so
Right.
when we have a belief, we're actually always subconsciously looking to reinforce that belief. And so we're looking for reflections outside of us to confirm that what we believe is real and true. And so, for those nurses and doctors that are in the system that do hold specific judgment with maybe a little bit of activation there with that judgment around families or mothers that try to home birth and then have to transfer, the confirmation bias that they're receiving is how often or frequently that home births actually do have to transfer to the hospital, right? But that interpretation, that confirmation bias is deeply skewed because they do not have the actual statistical number of how many attempted home births are actually having beautiful, successful births at home and how many are transferring, right? And so all
It's
their
not objective.
exactly, exactly. And so there's, yeah, there's and so that's what the process of reflection really takes us to, and critically thinking is like, well, I 100% of the time see home births transfer to the hospital, and it happens, this many times a week. And it's like, okay, great, it happens that many times a week, but how many women in your city birth that week at home that you have no awareness of, right? And you have no awareness of how those births went and what that woman experienced and what she felt. And so to just, look at the nuances of our humanness. And that's one, really big and beautiful thread that we can explore when talking about the medical system. And I'd love to go deeper, but I do just want to also present the other thread, which you kind of spoke to that I see. And I'm sure there's many more, but these two are really, in the forefront of my mind in this moment. And the other one is actually the protocols, right? And so, we do have these humans that in the same breath are coming in with their experiences and um, their belief systems. They also come in like pretty across the board. I mean, of course there's going to be different things informing this as well, but there's a drive to serve, right, that I think that actually needs to be acknowledged, and that comes from a really beautiful place inside of people, the intention to serve others. That's a really beautiful thing, right? And so to acknowledge that there is usually a good intention, right? And going down that path, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a surgeon, I want to help people, I want to save lives,
Yeah.
you know, that is all.
Even something like my mom was a nurse
Right.
and I love my mom. I want to be like my mom,
Totally,
like it coming from those places
totally.
and recognizing as well, people bash the system all the time. Oh, the system is bad. The protocols are bad. This is bad. Doctors, nurses, but what about Cheryl? That's the doctor. What about Lisa? That's the midwife. And like, it's bringing up emotion in me because I'm like, what about the humans? What about the people? And when we engage with them, reflecting, are we engaging with Lisa the midwife or Cheryl the doctor? Or are we engaging with them as women that are here on our team? And I think that's the ultimate goal is we get pregnant. Who are we inviting in on our team to support us? Who can we call in where I'm still the center? Like the mother baby dyad is still central. And I'm going to ask advice from this nutritionist and from this chiropractor and from this midwife and from this other midwife and from this doula and from this, unlicensed birth keeper and this OB and this other OB. Like asking these questions, but not putting anybody above you and not putting anybody below you. Right. And this is where I've seen in the Freebirth Society to make sure that we're kind of, still in that contained space too, that the Freebirth Society, the doctrine that I've witnessed, has been mostly doctors don't know your body like you do. They're down here. Midwives are the system that you're inviting into your home. They're down here. You need to be up top. You know your body best. All of these sorts of things. When really, what if we're just people? Because then in the medical system, what I've seen and heard other people experience is that the doctors are like, well, I'm the doctor, I know best. I'm the midwife, I know best. We're going to transfer right now because your labor's been 12 hours and I'm uncomfortable with this level of risk.
Right.
Right? Which could be fair. And again, there's nuances in all of those circumstances. And I wouldn't want a midwife or Sam, I wouldn't want Sam to perform a cesarean on me because she doesn't have that skill set. So
Sam,
yes, I
not want to
would.
perform a C-section.
No. So I would want a surgeon, a trained surgeon like OB to perform a cesarean if that was needed, right? But at the same time, let's discuss. Let's discuss at what point would a transfer need to occur if I wanted a home birth, and from different viewpoints, what different types of risks are there? What does risk even mean? How do we define risk? Is this the risk of death? Is this the risk of tearing more severely? What entails in risk that we can be discussing? But fundamentally, we are all people on the same side, for hopefully for the most part, with the objective that the birth will be the least traumatizing to the family unit, including dad, as possible, with the just best possible outcome of living baby, living mom. But that's also the bare minimum. That is not the only positive outcome that we are looking for. We are looking for connection after baby is born. We're depending on the understandings of the placenta. We were talking before we even got on the call, cutting the cord really soon. Like, what happens if that's not something that you want, and you discuss that with a surgeon and an OB or a midwife? Can you allow delayed cord clamping and all of these other things that we can discuss as well and go into? But fundamentally, we're all on the same team. At least this is my ideal, right?
Right.
Where we're working together to weave a tapestry where we can walk away feeling integrated in our birth experience.
Right. Right. Yeah, and what you spoke to there is something really profound, and you're echoing the teachings of my teacher Wapio. And for those of you who don't know Wapio, you should know Wapio. She's an amazing elder midwife out of the United States, and yeah, she's epic. Anyway, but she presents this beautiful teaching, and she names it quantum midwifery. And she is visioning and birthing into the world through her teachings and the ripple of those who receive her teachings, this exact perspective that you just described. And so what she teaches is that quantum midwifery is a collaborative process between the mother, the family, and the support systems. And it is exactly that. Like, the way she speaks into this is just so profound. It's
Mhm.
not, let's sit down and let me interview you, and I have this checklist and I'm going to sit here as the midwife or the doctor and you're going to answer these questions. And I had that experience. I went to go get help with paperwork. I didn't even want to hire a midwife to come into my space. And I was interrogated for like 3 hours. It was not helpful, And so she's presenting this teaching of like conversation, and like you sit down and it's like, hi, I'm Sam. Hi, Emma. Tell me about you. Tell me about
Mhm.
your life, your path, your heart, your prayers, your vision for your pregnancy, for your birth. How can we weave?
Mhm.
How can we stand next to each other as equals with equal respect for one another? My respect for you as the mother of this baby, and the intuition and the wisdom and the inner guidance that's informing you, while you are simultaneously respecting and honoring the path that I've walked in my education, in my experience of birthing my babies, in my just humanness and my womanness in this life, in this world. And we come and we sit at the table together with a cup of tea, and we look into each other's eyes and we build connection.
And what you're speaking to is relationship. And that is a big piece of what's missing. We go to a doctor and we are expected to hand over our trust and say, hey, I trust you because you're wearing a white coat with a stethoscope and you have this much experience. And there is so much validity to all of that experience. But in order to feel safe in a birthing space, the people that are welcomed into that space, there needs to be safety, and that is built through rapport, that is built through relationships, that is built through getting to know one another, and not just what are your fears and all of those beautiful things that you were speaking about, or what are your prayers, but what are your fears? what are your concerns? How were you born? Like, what informs your biology of what birth can be,
Right.
you know? And what birth stories have you heard of? What are your concerns? You know, and there's so many layers there that, I mean, now I've experienced actual relationship with many OBs and midwives and doctors that I'm like, I would love for you to be at my birth the next time, if and when that happens, you know. But that's because I've created and developed relationship with these people, not just doctors, not just midwives. Their expertise matters, but their humanness and their our relationship, our connection,
Right.
our friendship, our dynamic carries equal weight.
Right. Right. It's interesting, as you share that, like I'm just kind of contemplating some layers of that and
Mm-hmm. Of
nuances around it. And,
course.
it's very interesting, because what I'm seeing in this, like, okay, so like from the Freebirth Society's imprinting and, conditioning women to, put themselves above their care providers, and the opposite with the system and authorities, with the doctors being here, it's what is the actual pathway and process to unraveling that? What does it look like, right? Because I feel as though the authority figure of the doctor has been more like trained into the own personal belief of the superiority complex in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
And to like what has to happen, like does it have to happen on like in within the educational like process of training doctors to actually like train them to like you see your patients as equal, like how, like I feel curious of like how do we bring, because there are so many doctors, like I would say that there's probably, I mean this is maybe my bias and I can own that, but like there is a certain authority complex that comes with like that educational process, and I've seen it embodied in a lot of doctors. I've seen a lot of compassion in doctors, but I don't necessarily think that compassion and empathy equal the perception of seeing yourself as equal to your patient.
And um, I would say that it's not a black and white thing.
Right. Of course.
And it's not just about how do we educate doctors. It's also how do we encourage women to show up, bringing themselves up here,
Right.
right? Is it solely a doctor's responsibility
Right.
to understand all of this? And I mean, I think there is a certain amount of responsibility there to say, hey, you're a doctor, but you don't know this woman
Right.
at all. Like, but in a relationship, is it my responsibility or my partner's responsibility to know that we're equals?
Right.
Well, it's a relationship, so
Right.
it's both,
Right.
right? It's not just me putting my partner up here as, oh, he knows better than me, or he has more, I don't know, whatever it is. He brings his own unique things to the table, as do I. But
Right.
it's a relationship.
Culturally, there's a different perception there, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
would say culturally, we it would be very much so it would be way easier to see the coming together in partnerships or even in friendships as like equal, right? Because like there is definitely more normalization of like don't allow yourself to be treated as small by a partner or by a friend, But like there is a lot more conditioning to like allow yourself to feel small in the wake of an authority figure, and that not only being doctors, but that being police, that being teachers, that being, like it's kind of a condition
Parents.
that happens culturally, parents, exactly, right? And so from a very, very young age, we are all conditioned to have a certain, like we name it respect and reverence, but it's actually like a perpetuation of behavior. Like there's an expectation of a behavior in the wake of authority,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so like there is like kind of like a cultural conditioning that's actually happening there that is like not just about like okay the person coming up to the doctor's level, or I mean it can be that, but there's a lot more conditioning to unravel to see yourself as equal to a doctor than it is to see yourself equal to a potential friend or partner, right?
Right. And this is where, like, I mean, one of my practices for the last 10 years, I've been calling sacred curiosity because, like, there's so much more that I don't know than I do.
Totally.
And my experience with the medical system now, like, I went to go see my GP, my general practitioner, like, family doctor, about a month ago, maybe less. And I was asking him all these questions about like, okay, so I had all these surgeries, and if I want to have a baby, like, do you think I should wait a little bit, or do you think, just asking him tons of questions. And I kept, bringing these different things to the table. And he smiled and he laughed and he's like, Emma, I always end up leaving our appointments with more questions and having to go do more research and just not knowing things. And I can't answer you right now, but I'll like, let's meet up in a couple of months and I'll tell you what I find out for you. And I'm like, okay, cool. And like that level of humility from this amazing doctor who's like, come to the hospital. He finds out I'm in a hospital with sepsis again after Floyd died. And he visits me and he's like, hey, I heard you were in the hospital. I just wanted to say hi. And I'm like, what world did I fall into? Like, what doctor just comes and visits his, like, what?
Right.
And so I think there's a certain level of humility that we can also inspire in or invite in to doctors, and continue to ask questions, and not from like a prodding, sort of way, but a little bit, where I'll ask a doctor a question, and she'll say, no, you can't have a vaginal birth. And I say, okay, why? Okay, well, you've had this surgery, you have this scar tissue. And because of the location, it becomes, a dangerous space for you to then even attempt at having a vaginal birth, because you could tear in that same space and it could cause a lot of issues. Okay, what percentage is the likelihood that I'll tear? Oh, well, we don't really know because it's not very common. Okay, so if it's not very common, then how can you be certain in your accuracy with risk assessment? And they don't necessarily have answers. And I'm not asking to undermine their authority, but I'm asking to gain clarity. And if they don't have clarity, and articulating this as well, like, if you don't have clarity, that's okay. But we're on the same team. And I want to know my body. I want to know what's happening inside my body. I want to know what makes you say X, Y, and Z. Let's discuss this together. Let's research. I'm not in a rush. Go read some more, ask your colleagues. I'm curious. I'm going to also ask other people,
Right.
And that's something I'm very aware of, where like, I know that any future babies I have and any OBGYN appointments I have, Sam's on the phone with me in those appointments. Like, I know this already. This is a guarantee. I'm like, I'm not going in there by myself, because I'll have my questions. But even in this conversation, you're able to pull up things and see things differently, or catch different threads and poke holes where I'm not seeing those holes, right? And I can't necessarily control or make changes in the medical world. I don't know how to do that. But what I do have control over, what I am able to do, is how I show up. I can choose how to show up and invite that curiosity into that space.
Right. And like I would actually maybe challenge, even with that sentence, your statement before that of, I can't make change in the medical system.
I caught that too. No, I caught that too. I know. I was like, ooh, I don't know that though.
Well, my question actually would be, and actually like leaning towards an assumption, would be that the very process of being curious and asking questions is a vehicle for change.
Absolutely.
Because if your doctor walks away from your question saying, I don't know, but I'm going to find out for you, he just learned something. And
Yeah.
so there was change made.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Goosies.
yeah, totally. Perfect. Yeah. For
Yeah.
fun. It's fun to have conversations from an open place. I want to also just speak in, like, my bias has been in the orientation of home birth, and in my practice of studying, and the path that I'm walking in terms of birth keeping and traditional midwifery is that it's actually the roots and the tradition that for me does not exist in the container of a Western university setting. I don't personally carry the desire to educate myself in that setting. And that doesn't mean that I'm against the medical system either. And that doesn't mean that I'm against the wisdom in the medical system. In fact, I'm seeking external mentorship from midwives who have studied in those settings so that I can absorb the wisdom, just not in that setting. Right. Like
Hmm.
I've spent 6, 7 years in Western university settings, studying psychology. And I just don't have the desire to reorient in that direction, in that way, But that doesn't mean that just because I don't want to study in that setting, it doesn't mean that I don't have reverence or value for science, for the scientific process, for the textbooks and the teachings and, you know, what has been learned over the years of that. And I do want to interface with that knowledge and wisdom just outside of the system and that educational body, And so to just, yeah, early on in this process, speak myself into the space and my humanness and where I'm at and where I'm oriented and owning that. And I feel no shame in that, because I actually deeply desire to stand next to other people who have educated themselves in different ways and who have had different processes around their education.
Yeah. And I think that speaks something so beautifully in our ability to recognize that the system was built by critical thinkers, by human critical thinkers. I'm not a different type of human or less than or whatever. I am a person with questions, just like all the OBGYNs and all the doctors and surgeons that founded modern gynecology, that founded obstetrics the way that we understand it today, that founded midwifery. That was created because people had questions and were thinking critically and didn't understand something. And we forget a lot of the time, and I'm reflecting on a lot of family members where they do have that, like, they orient towards the medical system and they do pedestal like doctors and surgeons and all of these sorts of people. But we forget that it's called a medical practice because it is a practice, because it is evolving. It is not the same today than it was 50 years ago, than it was 10 years ago. It is an ever evolving thing. And so are we.
Right. And how does conversation inform evolution? How does our curiosity inform evolution? How
Mm-hmm.
does our willingness to step out of our own known echo chambers and spaces of comfort and familiarity
Mm-hmm.
inform evolution?
Mm-hmm.
My prayer for this space is the ignition of evolution in the birth world that we know today through the merging of different worlds and different belief systems and different experiences and different wisdom. Like, it's amazing the wisdom in the medical system, but you go and sit at the feet of traditional midwives who have followed the lineages of their grandmothers. Look, I live in Peru. So all across South America, there are traditional midwives who were never impacted by the onset of the Western medical industrial complex in the
Mm-hmm.
way that midwives and women who lived in those countries have been. So their traditions are alive, their connection to different plants to elicit different outcomes, to do different things, to their connection to ceremony, their connection to prayer, their connection to ritual, their connection to this quantum model, like the quantum model,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds really progressive, but it's just an ancient remembrance in my opinion of like recalling that like we used to the lineage of womanhood, the tradition of womanhood, like it used to be a solid foundation, and that of course varied from culture to culture. There's women have always had different practices and different rituals and different ceremonies across cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like that is the familiar thread, I think, is actually the connectivity. And right now we see quite a bit of severance in
Yeah.
in sisterhood and in women's relationship with one another. And how does
Yeah.
that then inform the way that we birth?
Yeah. Well, I saw this one video just speaking of this like quantum midwifery, where there was a woman who went to go get her copper IUD removed, and she went to this holistic midwife. And she walked in, she started with a yoni steam, like all of these things. And she's a medical practitioner, but she uses all of these ancient teachings and wisdoms, and she really integrates all of this, And just before, as you were speaking, I was trying to find this quote by Descartes. and I couldn't find it, but he's talking about before we can be certain with what we think we know, we have to doubt everything that we think we know. And so this is where bringing this back to like the Freebirth Society and the way that they're speaking about things, it's like, why not welcome in doubt? Why not welcome in contrasting opinions? Because that can be an invitation to either feel more concrete in what you're teaching, what you're sharing, what you're speaking about, or make intentional realignments with your message, with what you're offering the world, which we're always doing. And that's something that, like, in a birth setting, you've spoken to me about this a lot. You will not attend a home birth if the mother is so stuck in an ideology where she will not transfer at any cost, right? To be flexible with when we transfer if needed with awareness is a really powerful place to be.
I wouldn't attend a home birth with somebody who is fixated and not transferring to the hospital without a very serious conversation of what
Yes,
we're holding,
exactly.
the full spectrum of what that actually entails, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I also would not orient towards a hospital birth unless it was somebody that I knew and like had those deep quantum conversations, those connective conversations to understand the unique why for that, because one of my beliefs is that birth is not innately a medical event. I don't necessarily think that.
Exactly.
And because of the world we live in, I would never, if there was a button right now that would be like, no more hospital births, oop, I wouldn't hit it,
No.
you know? But
Yeah.
there's somebody out there for everyone. And yeah, so
Mhm.
to just, honor that process of every woman and family following their thread of truth, their thread of what safety looks like, feels like, and means for them. And for everyone to honor that, a nurse has a place, an OBGYN has a place, a GP has a place, a doula has a place, a birth keeper has a place, a traditional midwife has a place, a
Mhm.
medicalized midwife has a place, and free birth has a place.
Yeah.
It all has a place.
And getting curious about that why.
Right.
You mentioned why, and I could just see it in big, bold letters because I was like, that is so important to understand not just our decision making with all these different available paths to us and available support,
Right.
but why?
Right.
Why are we choosing this or this? Or why are we choosing this and this? Or why are we not choosing this?
Right.
Getting curious about what's underneath that why,
Right.
what's informing that why,
Right.
what's informing that decision making.
Right.
You know, how
Exactly.
many voices are speaking to us?
Right. Right.
You know.
And that's what I really personally love about this teaching around, what we're calling quantum midwifery, this pathway that is rooted in deep, true, real, alive, embodied connection. And like I love that so much because I feel like communication has to then be a root and conversation and getting to know one another and actually like going to those heart places and it not just be about like the logistics of everything, but it be in more it deeper than that, much more deep than that, and really rooted in what's on your heart, what is real and true for you in this moment, what's alive, even if it's separate from pregnancy or birth, creating space for that. And I really think that conversation is a vehicle for change. And it's not like we come in with an agenda for change. We come in curious towards what is present and is it all serving the highest? And if not, can we create space to let go or alchemize or transform or shift? Right. And I think that that's a thing that I just want, something I want to speak into the space is a willingness to change, and a willingness to give ourselves permission to
Mhm.
change and to change those ideas or those ideologies that are driving our lives that can become a part of our personality and our identity, right?
Mhm.
But that is a really dogmatic kind of area to get into, is when
Mhm.
our ideas become our identity, and that would be, then more into the space of ideology. And,
Hmm.
to kind of speak into that, ideas are flexible, we can bring them into conversation. And when, I say something and you're like, oh yeah, and then we go with it and we flow with it, and it has that flexible nature.
Yeah.
Ideology is really fixed and quite dogmatic often. And oftentimes, voids is void of like some really critical thinking. You know,
Hmm.
to give an example, like an ideology would be to say cervical checks are never serve a purpose. There's no reason to ever check a woman's cervix.
Hmm.
Well, is that true? Or could there be actually some very, very valid circumstances in
Hmm.
which the information gained from a pelvic examination
Hmm.
is beneficial to what's unfolding?
Yeah.
Right. And if you can't, like, if you're a woman listening to it and like, nope, it's never relevant, go deeper,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
A pelvic exam can be a way to determine cord prolapse.
Hmm.
Let's just give one example of what it could do. There's a million things that we could gain in terms of information that could inform the situation.
Whereas an idea, correct me if I'm wrong, would be more along the lines of I'm feeling hesitant or uncomfortable with the idea of cervical checks because I've heard this, or I read this article, or
Or my
this person
sister
told
had
me
this
this story.
experience, right?
Yeah.
My sister had cervical checks and it destroyed her birth, so I don't want them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's an idea. You nailed it on the head.
Mhm.
Exactly. And it's usually like there's usually an imprint in an idea, or somebody said something and it resonated. Because like it can also be true, right? Like the cervix is alive. And so routine cervical checks, when there isn't an actual need, it's just routine, like, oh, it's been this many hours, let's see how dilated you are.
Mhm.
To use that pathway for that, how far dilated we are does not inform any timeline, right? It does inform some degree of progress. However, it's very irrelevant information because if we're 5 centimeters dilated and that equates to halfway ready to that full dilation where we can start pushing, right? And start
Mhm.
activating the emergence. Well, those 5 centimeters could take 20 minutes to open. They could also take 3 days.
Yeah.
So like it's less relevant information. And the
Mhm.
reality is that there is validity to the teaching that the cervix is alive and is conscious and does respond. And when touched by unfamiliar fingers, and the woman, doesn't matter what part of her mind she's in, there is a subconscious unconscious awareness that it's not her partner, and it's not, like there
It's not her.
it's not her or her partner. It's not someone familiar that her body is like, yes, come in, right?
Mhm.
Even if there's a conscious thought of, this is a doctor, I trust my doctor, he's doing what needs to happen to birth my baby, and there's a certain level of sense of safety and in that and consent,
Mhm.
it does not mean that the body is not going to respond by ah, and that
Mhm.
tense closing energy, right? And so it's very, when contemplating birth, it is safety in order to open, the energetics of birth are those things. So
Mhm.
how do we hold space for that? How do we, as space holders, perpetuate a deeper sense of safety and comfort so that a woman can relax, surrender, and open, right? And those things can be done in a hospital setting. You can lower the lights, if there's not an emergent situation, maybe there's different protocols that can be changed. I really question things like continuous fetal monitoring, or,
Mhm.
I question the frequency of asking a woman what her pain is on a scale of 1 to 10 and reminding her that there's an epidural available.
Mhm.
Like there's just certain things that happen that I've seen with my own eyes as a doula working in the system, so I've seen these semantics, I've seen these practices in motion, and I do question the productivity of them in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that it's just important, again, like we are naming nuance, and to have those those conversations really. And, the invitation for those listening, like this was a teaching, the idea in ideology teaching as well, came through the program that I'm taking, just to credit my dear teacher Wapio. But, I really sat with that teaching because for sure I had ideologies around birth that I've actually just in recent time dissected. Right. And so I'm in the active process of what I'm inviting in this conversation and in this space and what we're inviting, and
Mhm.
I want to continue that. And I'm going to embody in this space shamelessly changing my mind when it becomes relevant. And I pray that we have speakers in this space that come in and share stories and share experience that make me hit pause and reflect on something and create more flexibility, spaciousness, change, whatever, is relevant. But
And if
go ahead.
and if the saying is accurate, we birth how we live. If we can be flexible in our mind and the way that we converse, we can be flexible in our birth, whether it's a birth of a baby or a rebirth of who we are, if we're going through like, a massive ego death, whatever it might be. If we can show up with flexibility, we can allow for change, whether it's changing into a position that can allow the emergence to flow through with more ease, or if we need to change and transfer, we can do that too. You know, whatever the case may be, if we can allow flexibility and changeability in our minds, knowing that we're always allowed to change our minds. Just because you get married and you want to stay with your partner and then you change your mind and you realize that you want to do something different and that feels like an authentic thing for you, whatever it is, you want to move countries, you want to, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to change your mind. You are not static. Birth is not static. As human beings, as organisms that are part of this macrocosm, microcosm on Earth, we are in a constant state of homeostasis, finding balance, readjusting, always, always. And that includes our beliefs, our ideas, our ideologies, our thought processes, the ways that we think about things, how we feel about things, our processing with grief, how we birth, how we die. We're allowed to be changeable. We're always changeable. If we think about like, I'm about to start my bleed, I think. I'm about to start my bleed, and I was luteal before, and then I was ovulating before that, and then I was follicular. And like, as women, we're always changing. We're not one thing. It's a constant experience of fluctuation and flexibility and evolution and death and birth and all of these cycles. There's so much beauty in that. And when we can, I think, lean into that and surrender into that, we can show up to birth, whether we are holding space for birth, whether our friend down the road just gave birth, whether you're giving birth, we're allowed to be flexible and changeable with even our perceptions.
Right. Exactly. And so I think that that is a really beautiful and profound note to end this conversation on. And of course, I think there are some layers that we might have kind of left loose, and I think that that's okay as well because it's a continuous conversation and we will be weaving and retouching, and we're two women and we are in a feminine process here, and we're going to let it flow and we're going to let it be what it is. And I think that that's a beautiful, there's kind of two big things to actually take away and contemplate, in your day to day, as for those listening, ideas and ideologies. Where are you holding ideas and where are you holding ideologies? And also, contemplating and questioning within yourself. Are you giving yourself permission to change your mind? And so for today, we will leave you with that. And we send all of our love and blessings and prayers for a beautiful day.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Wow.